Welcome to another episode of Big Cash Breakthrough, your gateway to digital wealth. Here with a special guest, Tyler Sehr. Met him in San Francisco. He's the CEO of Cookbook, and Tyler can explain more about that. But welcome. How are you doing today?
Glad to be here. I'm Tyler. Cookbook is a platform for devs to find and reuse smart contracts like NPM for Web3. And then we work with chains to help them onboard more developers.
Great. That's a great short pitch. So I usually start interviews with asking, how did you get into crypto? Did you first hear about Bitcoin, Ethereum? What's your story?
So I got in because during high school, I was building and selling computer rigs, gaming PCs, and I heard about Ethereum mining on Reddit and through a friend of mine. So I figured that since I was buying and reselling computer parts and full builds, I might as well just give it a shot. So I built out a mining rig, put in a bunch of GPUs from Craigslist, and started making a good bit of money mining Ethereum and Monero, as well as Sia coin really early on. This was back when ETH was maybe like $25 an ETH. I then found a way to make it even more profitable. I went to college and had free electricity in the dorms, but that didn't work for very long. That worked for one semester before they kicked me out of the dorms, and I was making so much money that I decided that instead I was just going to just do this, and dropped out of college. So I went and got an apartment that had electricity built into the cost of rent. So free electricity again, and did it again until I got a cease and desist from the landlord. So that's how I got into crypto. Of course, throughout that time, since I was mining ETH, I learned about smart contracts. I heard about some of the things that were happening with the technology, and I only knew a little bit of Java at that time. So I learned Solidity. After I learned Solidity, I realized, okay, you need to build a website, a front end for the smart contracts in order to interact with them as a regular user. So I learned full stack web development, JavaScript, CSS, HTML, a bunch of frameworks, React, AngularJS. Following that, went and learned about C++ Rust at another school. And so I essentially paid my way using my crypto earnings through a couple of different programs I wanted to attend and learn everything about coding and programming that I needed to. From there, I started my consulting business a couple years back, which we did full stack end-to-end app development for a couple of years. Basically anything from design work, smart contracting work, security testing, and then maintenance long-term, building dApps for a number of different clients that we would find just within the community. Now, this was during 2021, and so we had a bunch of different somewhat degen projects that we had to build, and that's when I realized I didn't really want to be doing this. I wanted an out. So I began launching my own side projects from this business, and then one of the internal tools I created for that consulting business was a library of smart contracts we wrote and reused. And so we put a public-facing UI on it, launched it, and began spreading the word to developers on Twitter, and started getting developers using it without us really putting in a huge amount of time marketing it. So we realized we hit on a need where developers are looking to reuse code. There's not really a great resource to find and reuse smart contracts that are more than like the basic things that you'll get on OpenZeppelin. And GitHub is just way too difficult to sort through. It's hard to know if what you're using is trusted, and often it lacks complete documentation. So we created Cookbook as a NPM for Web3, and that's been doing pretty well for the last 2 years. Been growing, getting more developers, and now we're beginning the path to monetization with our partnerships with chains. So that's a bit of a long-winded answer, but that's the whole path from not into crypto to Cookbook.
Yeah, no, fascinating story. I wish I could dig in a little bit more in the details of the mining experience and things like that. But it's great to see that you had this entrepreneurial kind of experience and spirit, and always having a business and also being able to fund yourself at such an early age. It's just fantastic. But let's fast forward to now and you did have one other kind of project, right? You mentioned before it was something to do with stocks, like and I don't know if it's related to the one you just mentioned where you were working. Was that a side project? One of the side projects that you did?
I had a number of side projects that I was trying to see where they'd go. That was just one of them. There were literally 4 or 5 others that just didn't really get the attention that was needed, and they didn't really solve a problem that I was particularly interested in until Cookbook.
Okay, great. And then you have this background like as a developer. And so what are your thoughts as just being a developer founder? Because it's being a founder is a lot different with a lot of kind of business. You're fundraising now, so it's entirely different. But you had this kind of knack for just business in general. But like, how is it from maybe just being more of having a developer mindset? What things do you think? What skills are you having to get good at that maybe is different from what you expected as a more of a developer? And what kinds of things are you having to do day to day as a founder that is, I think, important for new founders to know about?
So I think it has a lot to do with like your aperture of focus. So if you
Mhm.
think of it like a camera, you can focus in really tight. And what that does is that squeezes the aperture of the lens, or squeezes the aperture where light can come in and go through the lens and then hit the film. You need to be able to focus in really on micro details when you're coding. You need to worry about like the system that you're building, the larger architecture, and then line by line, worry about what you're writing, optimizing it, testing it, and all of that. But then when you're building a company, you have to really be able to look out and understand the larger picture about the business, how all the different pieces play together, whether that's marketing, sales, products, and then even just like random admin ops work. And in addition to that, when you're programming, you want to be an introvert, right? You want to be able to sit there and focus for 16 hours straight and not be distracted. So you just have to sit there for a long time. But then when you are doing partnerships or sales or business development, you have to go to the complete opposite extreme, and you have to be a complete extrovert, and you want to be able to talk to people for 16 hours a day. So being able to do both things is very useful, or being able to have somebody who can own the sort of external extroverted sales side of the business, and then one person to just handle the introverted product software development side of the business. Either that or being able to switch between the two of them is super duper important. You can't just focus on one and then hope that the other is just going to take care of itself, because it never does.
Yeah, that's great advice, and it's a good way to describe it. Fundraising right now, that seems like the immediate thing. Any tips or advice as you are in the process of it? And congrats, I think it was just last year that you raised a couple $1 million, right? And then now you're in the process again. So what was that experience like just a year ago? And it was probably a lot tougher a year ago compared to it is, or I don't know, maybe you can maybe you can give us a kind of a feel of the level of activity in fundraising.
So it's different. We're only a couple weeks in, so I don't know how easy or hard it is right now. Typically, with fundraising, nothing happens for the first half of the time you spend fundraising. Like, you make zero progress. All you're doing is refining the pitch. You get ghosted by a bunch of people. And then at some point, you get a term sheet, and the round very quickly wraps up, and you get a lot of interest. So it's something where you just have to stick with it. You have to keep refining it. If it's going slowly, then that's okay. You just want to make sure that you are keep moving it forward, that you're not getting too discouraged by it. I think another important thing is that it is very valuable to not try and quickly fundraise. I think when you go out and your plan is to fundraise within 2 weeks, you are setting yourself up for failure. I think the best way to go about fundraising is to first go out, talk to a couple of key people. And now, of course, this is different from company to company. Some companies have so much inbound interest that they can just sign a bunch of investors on, and they don't need to really go out and fundraise. But for the companies where you do need to go out and fundraise because there's not a overwhelming amount of inbound interest, you do want to go out for a decent period of time and just test your pitch amongst investors without talking to all of the investors that you're interested in talking to. You want to test against maybe 10 or 20 first and make sure that there are no major issues with your company. And then once you have that level of refinement, then you can go ahead and go wide and talk to a large number of investors. I think it also helps to just keep all the investors that you talk to updated with all the progress that your company has made over the course of the fundraise, which means that the rest of your team needs to be working really hard and just killing it, bringing in new contracts, pushing product development, or pushing new product features, landing new sales partnerships, and all of that. So it's something where I think people often go into fundraising when they're desperate for money, and that's the worst time to do it. You want to go into it slowly at your own pace and experiment with it before you try and go as fast as you can.
Yeah, that sounds like fantastic advice. Do you have an example of your pitch like currently? I know it's still early. It'll be refined as in a couple weeks. But yeah, what's your pitch right now? Cookbook. Pretend I'm a VC.
So I do my pitches a little differently, actually. I can't really pitch it to you
Okay.
because I'm on my phone. Usually what I do is I give
Okay.
the sort of short blurb I did at the very beginning. Cookbook is building the Hugging Face for Web3. We license it out to chains, embed it within their docs so that they can onboard more developers. And then I go into a product demo. I don't really pitch it. I give like the quick summary and go into a product demo and then talk about our sales pipeline and then just take Q&A. I don't like to use a deck. I think that decks are actually an anti-pattern. They're nice for presentations, but I think that a demo is honestly better. And then maybe you have, or if you do have a deck, you just have a couple of short slides that show the most important information rather than a 15 slide deck, maybe just like a 6 to 8 slide deck about the most critical things along with the product demo. I think that's the most useful. So I do my pitches a bit differently from other people. I don't know if I'm doing it, if it's more effective or less effective than what other companies are doing. All I know is that it's worked for me in the past. So who knows?
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I think there are different ways to do it, but from your developer founder as well, so you can really show your products. And I think that, and it's really about the relationships, right? If you know them well enough, I think those are the key points, the relationship, and then just showing what you actually have. So I think that's great advice. What else? We can switch gears a little bit. This is great advice, but I want to ask you about, oh, your video cut off. And so hopefully the video is a little jittery sometimes, but we'll see. I think you got a lot of great, I think, at least audio clips. We'll see what we can do with this. But so big day today, ETH. What are your thoughts?
I don't know if it's guaranteed. I honestly, I ignore most of this stuff. It's great for
Oh,
prices,
okay.
great for adoption, but it's not gonna. It's something to celebrate after it happens.
Okay. No, I think it was officially approved as far I know on the Twitter feeds that I've seen. So there
I'll see. I haven't
was.
checked Twitter yet today, so maybe it
Oh,
did. I
okay.
don't know.
Okay. So yeah, it's official as far as my Twitter feed tells me, and there were at least a handful of confirmations that are legitimate.
Which
It's
ETF got
approved.
approved with which company?
I think all of them pretty much. All the ones that applied.
All at
There's
once?
probably I assume so. It's similar to what happened with Bitcoin
What
once.
happened? I don't think that's
Huh?
what happened. I'd have to check, but I think everybody was asked to modify their filing, and their filings are now changed, and now the SEC is evaluating. That's what I
So
heard in the last day or two.
yeah. From my understanding, it's approved. I think it was similar to Bitcoin where they had to make some changes, but they were just requesting everybody to make the changes before the announcement. And yeah, so assuming everything I read is there. Everyone's talking about it, and you'll get on Twitter and you'll see the
Okay.
conversations going around about it. But yeah, celebrate. I guess it's just more of celebration, but you're not too concerned fundamentally outside of that. I guess you're still just focused on the business. How do you see the ecosystem right now? I was going to ask you another question about, but then let's go back to that afterwards. But Ethereum, how do you see the current ecosystem? I think it's great news. There's going to get a lot more attention and a lot more developers, I think, involved, probably more institutional as well. But aside from that, what's the pulse of the developer ecosystem in Ethereum right now? What do you see going on? They usually have a lot of dev cons and conferences. Maybe you can share the latest in the most recent conference you've gone to. Yeah, what is the latest?
It's a little hard to be specific on that. Everything is pretty much where it was on the developer side, exactly the same as a year ago. People are building. There are major barriers to entry in the space, so it's very hard for new people to join. Probably 9 out of 10 plus developers who try and get into the space end up giving up because the tooling, the documentation, all of that, the level of difficulty is just too high. Really, the space has the wrong idea about onboarding developers. A lot of money is spent on throwing money at the problem through hackathons, bounties, and the tooling's just not that good. And the documentation's just not that good. There are just major issues for both of those sides of the equation. And so you get a lot of devs who are just going to build on an ecosystem for the money. You bring in devs for the wrong reason. So they build in one ecosystem for the money, and then another ecosystem offers them more money, so they go to that ecosystem. Then there's a bear market, there's no more money left, and so they leave Web3. We've created an army of mercenaries, and to be fair, I don't blame developers for this. I blame the incentive structure that we created. Developers are the ones who are winning this far and above more than chains and protocols are, because developers are smart. They're playing by the rules that have been created by these different ecosystems. But we've created essentially a developer community that is very mercantile, and people will join and leave the space following the incentives. And the people who stick around in the space are the people who truly believe. And they've been in the space for several years now at this point. They're experienced lead developers. They're using Foundry. They're building protocols. So they're not as tied to incentives because they've leveled up enough to the point where they can create enough value to where they can build a company, a protocol themselves. They can get transaction volume, and they can build a startup that way. They don't rely on the incentives from these chains, at least not to the same degree that newer developers do. And it's also a problem because a lot of new developers in Web3, they'll follow airdrop incentives. They'll just follow airdrop incentives from one chain to another, deploy a couple of smart contracts on a chain, get the airdrop, and then move on to the next ecosystem. They're not actually building anything. And they're also following the incentives. They're playing the game correctly. They're playing the game that these chains have created. So we've got this real issue in the space where we are going about developer onboarding the wrong way. We need to go about it from the direction of developer tooling and community, which there's a couple of new companies going about this. The Build Guild has been in the space the longest, trying to build developer communities and developer tooling for onboarding more developers. And so they're the kind of the one that I would highlight first. And then Dabble Club is coming at it from the community side. What we really need are more companies like that who are going to be focused on community, developer tooling, and just making it so that building in Web3 is just much easier. And then the incentives, you modify the incentives a bit, and people will actually be wanting to build in the space and sticking with like a certain ecosystem rather than hopping between them.
Yeah, that's great. And how do you stand with Cookbook? Because hey, you're a business as well. There's incentives, and I guess playing by the rules. I guess that's this part of this opportunity. But then you want to create a sustainable operations as well. So I'm sure with better incentives, that's going to just make it a lot better for your business in the long run. But how do you balance that? And then we talked about monetization. So you're saying, hey, a lot of these ecosystems are throwing money at the problem. Developers are doing well, they're incentivized. So from a business standpoint, from a long-term business standpoint, just what are your views? How are you guys going to make this, or attempt to make this better, and maybe without, or just at least adjusting to it, because maybe some things are outside your control?
So I would say first, what we want to do is first and foremost is bring new developers into the space. We do that by making it easier to build dApps because we let people reuse code. You can look at Web 2 as a good example. It's much easier to build in Web 2 because of tools like NPM. And if NPM wasn't around, it'd be much harder to build in Web 2, much harder to build websites, much harder to do anything. You wouldn't have frameworks like React, or at least you wouldn't have them be as readily accessible as they are today. So we're coming at it from that perspective to make dApps easier to build. Following that, we want to help chains onboard and retain these devs by making it easier to build on these chains. A lot of chains, you would struggle to find the add chain to wallet button because there isn't one. And if you're a new developer and you don't know what chain list is, then it's very hard to actually go and do that. And this is just the most basic problem that some of these chains suffer from in their documentation. The easiest thing for us to do is to help these chains onboard more, to help onboard more developers for these chains, is to use what we built on Cookbook already and embed it within their documentation. That way, a new developer wants to build on top of this shiny new L2. They're curious about the L2. They can do so directly from within the docs of the site and deploy their first project and dip their toe in, begin building right away. Not necessarily spending a week trying to set up their environment and trying to deploy something because nobody really wants to spend that much time. If you can just do it in a couple of minutes through Cookbook.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, and that's fantastic that you guys are identified that. Any insights on just the layer 2 ecosystems? Base seems to be getting a lot of attention. They're huge. You got Optimism, Arbitrum. You have a lot of ZK technology, right? Layer 2s. And then, so how do you see the space? Any kind of insights you have on that area, layer 2s, and who's doing it, who's maybe needs to improve, what projects are getting the excitement, what types of projects? Yeah, how do you see that?
I'm not really going to weigh in there. The way I see it
Mhm.
is it's up to the users of these L2s to determine which ones are the best. I think there are a couple of key things that each L2 needs to focus on, which is one, you need distribution. You need distribution to a market vertical of users and own that use case. And then you also want to make sure that when you dominate that vertical, that no one else can really enter and compete with that vertical. A good example would be like Tron dominating USDT payments outside the US and the Eastern Hemisphere. Is very commonly used. They've got enormous transaction volume doing that. Sure, they might not have much traction in other market verticals, but for that specific use case, they really dominate it. And each L2 needs to find a similar market vertical that they can dominate and own. Otherwise, they end up competing with everybody. And so then it just becomes who offers bigger incentives. So they need to find their own market vertical in order to succeed.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. Yeah, and it's surprising how well Tron has done with USDT. And USDT in terms of volume is greater than Bitcoin when it comes to at least transaction activity. So
Yeah.
volume, yeah, it's just incredible. People use it more to transfer money than Bitcoin.
Yeah, and here in the States, we there's a bit of a poor reputation for Tron and USDT here. But I would say that honestly doesn't matter. That's our problem because the transaction volume is high enough. The real use case is common enough that people are using it every day in the Eastern Hemisphere, and we're just stubbornly looking at it and shaking our heads. So I think ultimately it's the users of these platforms that determine whether they succeed or not. And that's where Tron is doing. That's the only thing that matters.
Yeah, that definitely, yeah, makes a lot of sense. All right, we got a few minutes left. Any kind of, we'll have you back. You got a lot of great insights here. I enjoyed your insights, perspective. Anything else you want to share with people that are either builders or even investors, enthusiasts in this space? Anything you want to share that you've learned over the years? You're young, maybe not that many years in this, but in crypto, like the number of years is like dog years, right? So you got a lot of experience. And anything you want to share as we wrap up here?
I don't really have anything. Yeah, I would
Mhm.
just say to check out cookbook.dev if you're a builder, see if it might be helpful to you. It's free for developers, never going to cost any money for a dev to use it. And yeah, other than that, if you want to contact me, just join our Discord or follow me on Twitter.